Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we are going to be talking about playing two notes at the same time, and the focus will be the right hand for today. The next lesson will cover left hand and some of the elements that come into play when we're playing multiple notes at the same time. Your next solo piece will incorporate this, and it will have a bass line and it will have a soprano line. So all that means is that your very first piece, you're going to be playing notes in the bass while you also play notes up high, generally on the first two or three strings. So today let's talk a little bit about the right hand and how that works. We're going to start off with thumb under, and I will readjust a little bit. I've been playing around with my sitting position and find something that I can sort of quickly change between all of the different hand positions here while saving my back. So if you've been working dutifully on your right hand and your pieces, you've now got a nice arm motion, and you have thumb and index alternation. Maybe you're doing thumb out. Maybe you're doing M and I alternation. Those of you on your 10-course lutes playing ballet and ballard, that's a fantastic position to be in. So how do we play two notes at the same time? And I think there are a couple of things I just want to say about that. Number one, we are going to do free stroke for now with all fingers. I know that some people incorporate rest stroke with the thumb, but for today, I really would like everyone to get comfortable with free stroke. And just as a reminder, free stroke is when we pluck a string and then we leave the string. Rest stroke, for example, with the thumb would be when we pluck the string and go straight down. So when we play multiple notes, you have an option on the lute, which is you can play it with the thumb resting or you can play it free. And I'm going to have us focus on free strokes for now. Now, the nice thing is that for each hand position, there's going to be some common rules to follow. So if you watch the bit on thumb under, you'll have a clue what's coming up for you in thumb out, or maybe in your M and I alternation. But the first, I actually think that the most challenging thing is dealing with adjacent courses. So let's say we had to pluck the second course and the first course at the same time. From the sources, there are actually a couple options for how to do this. The options become narrower as we get lower, or a little more challenging. I suppose you certainly could use your M finger to grab the adjacent string there, but it does get a little more challenging, and it might depend on your hand type. And I should say, I will have a handout in the description here, both in Italian tablature and in French tablature, to help you guys out and to have some things to work on to prep. So what we're looking at here is we've got our thumb on the second course. We have our index finger on the first course. The thumb is just like you've been doing. It's going to be pushing down, and the index finger is going to be pushing up. This is a very standard way of playing two adjacent courses, so using the thumb and the index finger. This is described in the variety of lute lessons, and they're talking about both thumb under and thumb out, so no difference. If you are a thumb out, you're going to be doing P and I, like that. In other sources, it becomes clear that they would actually use the M finger on an adjacent string. So always using the M finger like that. And then when you get lower into the strings, you may switch to P and I. And I think that's going to depend on your hand size on that decision you make. Now, this is something to experiment with, to play with, to see what feels more comfortable. And I would say that it may change down the road. You may decide for now that you really like P and M as your plucking of two notes. There are some advantages to that. But experiment maybe every couple months and see if something feels a little different as you go along. I've certainly done that. I've changed the way I've approached playing two notes at the same time, particularly on adjacent strings. So the important thing when plucking is that we're still engaging the whole arm. So the thumb is going down. We'll start with index here. So we're going to thumb and index. So the thumb is going down and the index is going up. And you'll notice My arm is still moving. It's following the thumb, the larger digit. Now let's see what that looks like if I decided to use the middle finger. Now with the middle finger, you may have some collision where the thumb runs into the middle finger a little bit, and that's totally fine. That's absolutely fine. Not something to worry about. I find when using thumb under that the P and M is a little more challenging on adjacent strings. If you're a thumb out player, I find that to just be my go-to. I'm always using P and M until I get down into the bass courses, like that. And again, if you are thumb out, you'll notice that I'm engaging the entire arm. And we'll talk about why in just a second. But you'll notice I'm not trying to hold my arm completely still and just pluck from the fingers. I'm not doing this. I'm moving my arm and bringing the thumb down, and technically the index finger down. We'll go back to thumb out, thumb under. Same thing here. Now, the reason we want to keep this arm motion is that in the Renaissance, one of the most common textures is that you're going to pluck a chord and then immediately get back into your single line playing. So we're just going to be doing this so much that we want to pluck the chord and get right back into that motion. And so if you stop your arm motion when you pluck the chord, then you have to restart it. It can cause some issues. So what I would recommend, and this is actually much more challenging for beginners than I think I remember. One thing to keep in mind is I've been playing for 27 years, and it's really easy to forget how hard this stuff is when you first start off. And I think sometimes there's a benefit actually from learning from a teacher who maybe is a little less experienced and remembers the struggle. I think I was 10 or 11 when I first started doing this on classical guitar, so that memory is very, very vague. So keep that in mind. What I'm doing here will not be, especially if you're a complete beginner, it's not going to be that easy. You need to go very, very slowly. And make sure you're hitting both courses. And you can check that. You can play them separately. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. Follow that with an index finger. I'm going to include that in my little exercise packet for you guys. But the idea is chord, or with M finger. Down the road, we'll talk about situations where it's actually nice to use M and I. So for now, though, let's always use the thumb for the lower note, which might feel a little weird for you classical guitar players who are used to having that thumb down there. But with the Renaissance lute, sort of the standard setting is this P and I alternation. So you're just going to very slowly work that up. Now, I think the challenge with P and I is that you've got a repeat of the I after you play the chord. And then the challenge of P and M is just sometimes getting out of the way of yourself. So going P, M, I, P, I, P, M, I, P, I. So you're going to have to play around with that. I also find it sometimes difficult to get the M on lower strings. Admit that I think it's a lovely sound, though. I don't know which I like better, using the P or I or the P and M for those adjacent strings. And I have to tell you that I don't want to tell you which I prefer, because I probably will be a little different in a couple months as I play around with it. I think I like the idea of P and M because then you don't have that repeat of the I finger. On the other hand, I know from sources that they definitely did use P and I to play these adjacent strings, and it can be just as lovely. So experiment with that, see how it feels. Now, for those of you who are doing M and I alternation, honestly, it's the same thing. You're going to be like thumb out. You can either play with P and I as the Dolan's recommended and Bassard in the variety of lute lessons, or you can use P and M. Oh, sorry, I was doing thumb and index alternation. Let me show how you guys would do that. So you're using M and I alternation, whereas the thumb out players are going to be using P and I. And I have to admit that when I am using thumb out position, I am definitely using the M finger when I am playing adjacent strings. I find that to be so much easier. I know it's not what the Dolans recommend in the book, but I find it quite a bit more comfortable. Experiment with it, see how you feel, and then when I get to the lower courses, I switch to P and I. Just because I start to lose the ability to reach with my middle finger. Now, when we are playing strings that are farther apart, in general, I'm always using M. That's whether I'm thumb under or I'm thumb out, or whether I'm doing M and I alternation. Now, I think an important thing, this is a little reminder to our M and I players, that even though you're not doing P and I, where you have this arm movement that is so built into it, or out, which is the same, arm movement here, I think if you're doing M and I, it's still a good idea to incorporate a little bit of that arm movement so that the plucks are coming from almost like a golf swing. They're going through the string, because it's going to be very different than classical guitar technique, and it's not knocking classical guitar technique. It's just different. I think if you're trying to get that Renaissance sound, you're going to be better with a free stroke, and you're going to sound a little more like the other players if you use your entire arm and you use that pinky as an anchor. And then obviously as you get faster, the movement is going to get a little bit smaller. But that is true for any of these techniques. You may have a large arm movement, and then as you get faster, they make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to give you a packet with some of these exercises to work on. I think a couple things to kind of boil it down. Whatever technique you decide to use, whether you use P and I, whether you use P and M for adjacent strings, what I would say is make sure that both notes are clear, that they're very, very clear. So pluck them separately, and then pluck them together. And then once you've got that really comfortable, we're going to add what is essentially single notes afterward, which is just a really common texture in the Renaissance. And so getting that motion, getting that transition from chord to single line, chord to single line is a really, really important thing to build up. Play around with these ideas, see what feels well. The other thing that I think is important to keep in mind as you're doing this is that it's okay if you hit a wrong string. It's okay if you are a little clumsy at first, but make sure that the motion stays in the arm. It's really common for people when they, for example, hit a wrong string, they do something wrong, they sort of shrink the motion and they try to make it smaller and smaller. And what I would do is I would just try to keep that arm moving, even if it's a little messy at first. So same rules that you were using when you were learning your single line. And then as you descend into the bass, so let's say you're following the exercises I give you, and you're doing something like this. Notice the thumb going back a little bit. And now the fingers are coming up. You may find that you need to switch to thumb and index. Or if you feel comfortable, you could continue to use M. If you are using M and you decide not to just use index for those adjacent strings. Let's see, is there anything else that I want to say about this for now? I don't think so. I think what we're going to do is we'll talk a little bit in the next episode about playing two notes with the left hand and some comfortable things. I'll include some exercises. If people have questions about specific things that are occurring when they try this out, please post it in the comments. But I think that's about it for now. We're going to start getting more and more complicated as we add more voices. So this will be our first step. And when I do release the piece that will have two voices, I will release some videos as well to how do we break it down, how do we learn a piece. I think at that point it's going to be more appropriate than it was when we were looking at trebles. So keep an eye out for that. Happy luting, happy practicing. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I'm sure I missed some stuff and we'll need to further refine some things. Again, like I said, when you've been playing as long as I have, some things are just automatic. And if I were talking to you in person, you'd go, but Laudon, what about this? And I'd say, oh, right. That's really obvious. I should have mentioned this. Now, the nice thing about YouTube and the setting is it's not like a book where I have to write something down and I'm stuck with what I wrote. The nice thing is you can write a comment, you can ask a question, and I can respond to it. I've already helped some students with some questions. They've given me little videos and they've said, oh, but what about this spot? Or what do I do here? And I've just sent a response. I said, oh, that's a really interesting spot that does deviate from what we talked about. Here are a couple possible solutions. So don't take anything I say as absolutely set in stone. It's very open to interpretation and to further discussion. So happy luting, happy practicing, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode when we talk about the left hand and playing multiple notes at the same time. Have a good one.